December 8, 1941. The world had shifted overnight. Across the Atlantic, in London, Winston Churchill awoke to news that would shake even the most seasoned statesman. Pearl Harbor, the pride of American naval power, had been devastated. Entire battleships lay crippled. Thousands of sailors were dead or missing, and the Pacific now stood as an open theater for Japanese aggression. In the halls of 10 Downing Street, the weight of this news pressed heavily upon the Prime Minister. Churchill, known for his unyielding public confidence, allowed himself a rare private moment of reflection. The official statements and speeches could wait. First, he needed to record his unfiltered thoughts, pulling out a notebook reserved for personal reflections. A book that would rarely see the eyes of colleagues, he began to write. His handwriting, usually sharp and precise, now carried the tremor of someone grappling with the gravity of the moment. He did not simply write about the attack. He wrote about the implications, the strategic ripple that would now sweep across the globe. The attack on Pearl Harbor was more than a blow to the United States. It was a clarion call that the Axis powers, in their audacity, were prepared to challenge every assumption of global balance. For Britain, still recovering from the Blitz and the relentless Luftwaffe raids, the challenge was immediate. Allies were needed, but the timing was uncertain. Churchill's words captured both hope and trepidation, a delicate balance between the pragmatism of a seasoned politician and the raw anxiety of a man staring down a global conflagration. In these pages, he pondered the American response. Would Roosevelt move decisively, or would isolationist sentiment slow their entry into the war? Churchill knew the stakes. Britain alone could not hold the line indefinitely against Hitler and his European ambitions. The destruction at Pearl Harbor, he realized, might finally tip the scales, but only if handled with precision, persuasion, and a careful cultivation of transatlantic trust. Yet, his reflections were not only strategic. Churchill also wrote of human costs, imagining the families mourning across the Pacific, the sailors caught in fiery chaos, and the lives forever changed by decisions beyond their control. He reminded himself that war was not only a matter of tanks and ships, but of courage, sacrifice, and moral fortitude. Every word he wrote was a testament to the enormity of what lay ahead. By mid-morning, Churchill had completed his initial entry. He closed the notebook, aware that his private musings would soon be replaced by urgent telegrams, cabinet meetings, and strategic conferences. But in that moment, with the world in upheaval and the fate of nations uncertain, he had captured the essence of a leader confronting history in real time. A leader who understood that the war, now truly global, demanded both clarity of mind and steadfast resolve. The morning after Pearl Harbor was not just a turning point for the United States. It was a pivotal juncture for Churchill himself. In the silence of his private study amidst the chaos and the fear, he began to chart the course that would define the next 4 years of conflict. A course grounded in foresight, alliance, and an unshakable belief that tyranny, no matter how formidable, could be overcome. December 8, 1941. Across London and Washington, the reverberations of Pearl Harbor sent shockwaves through governments, militaries, and civilian populations alike. For Winston Churchill, the news was not merely a diplomatic turning point. It was a moment of profound reflection on the fragility and resilience of nations. Britain, already under siege from the Luftwaffe and facing the unyielding might of Nazi Germany on the continent, now looked across the Atlantic to an ally whose potential had remained largely untapped. In the quiet of 10 Downing Street, Churchill pored over dispatches and telegrams from British envoys in Washington. The Americans, he knew, were still grappling with the magnitude of the disaster. Roosevelt had delivered his radio address to the nation, calling December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. But behind the official rhetoric lay the uncertainty of a population unaccustomed to the full horrors of war. Isolationist factions, long resistant to foreign entanglements, were now forced to reconcile their ideals with the stark reality of Japanese aggression. Churchill's private writings from this period reveal a mix of relief, urgency, and strategy. Relief, because the United States, long a powerful yet hesitant ally, was now inexorably drawn into the conflict. Urgency, because the war's scope had expanded overnight, and the Axis powers were unlikely to rest while the Western powers scrambled to respond. Strategy, because the Prime Minister understood that America's industrial might, combined with Britain's enduring resilience, could finally shift the balance. but only if carefully harnessed. In his notebook, Churchill reflected not only on military logistics, but on the psychology of a nation awakening to war. He wrote of Americans' sense of betrayal and shock, of families mourning the sudden loss of sons and fathers, and of leaders wrestling with decisions that would define the course of history. His words capture a rare glimpse of the private Churchill, a man who saw beyond propaganda and public morale, peering instead into the raw, human dimensions of a world at war. The devastation of Pearl Harbor, Churchill realized, was both tragedy and opportunity. Japan had demonstrated audacity, striking deep into the Pacific with precision and ruthlessness. Yet this very act forced the hand of the United States, ensuring that the full might of American industry and military capability would soon be directed against the Axis. For Britain, this meant a renewed sense of hope, tempered by the understanding that the war's eastern and western theaters would now expand exponentially, demanding unprecedented coordination and sacrifice. Churchill's writings also reveal his prescience regarding the global implications. He noted the vulnerability of colonies across Asia, the threat to supply routes critical to Allied survival, and the potential for Nazi Germany to exploit any delay in American mobilization. He envisioned a world divided not only by ideology but by logistics, supply chains, and the movement of men and materiel across oceans and continents. Every line in his journal reflects a mind wrestling with the interconnectedness of global strategy, recognizing that victory would require not just courage but meticulous planning and foresight. By the end of the day, Churchill's reflections had taken on a prophetic quality. He anticipated the monumental challenges ahead: the coordination of multinational forces, the moral burden of command, and the necessity of sustaining civilian morale amidst relentless conflict. The nation in shock was, in his eyes, a world poised on the edge of transformation. And as he closed his notebook, the Prime Minister prepared to step fully into the role history demanded of him. A leader navigating chaos, guiding alliances, and confronting the greatest conflict the world had ever known. As the shock of Pearl Harbor rippled across the globe, Winston Churchill recognized that the most delicate task ahead was forging a personal and strategic bond with Franklin D. Roosevelt. While the leaders had corresponded before, the events of December 7th demanded more than formal diplomacy. They required private counsel, candid assessments, and mutual understanding of the immense stakes at hand. Churchill knew that the United States, though now officially at war, would need guidance, reassurance, and a vision that could sustain public support and military planning alike. In the days following the attack, Churchill began a series of confidential communications with Roosevelt, revealing thoughts that were never meant for public eyes. These letters, memoranda, and personal notes underscore the depth of their wartime collaboration. Churchill's writings reflect not only tactical insight, but also a keen awareness of Roosevelt's political constraints. He understood the American president had to navigate a nation still grappling with isolationism, a Congress wary of foreign entanglements, and a public traumatized by the sudden loss of life in Hawaii. Churchill's counsel was both blunt and visionary. He emphasized the importance of immediate, decisive military action, while warning of the potential pitfalls of fragmented strategy. He dissected Japan's likely objectives in the Pacific, noting the vulnerability of the Philippines, Malayan, and key supply routes, and urged Roosevelt to consider a unified Allied command structure. Yet Churchill also offered reassurance. The British Empire, though battered by relentless bombing campaigns and strained resources, remained resolute. London would act as both a partner and a guide, providing intelligence, military expertise, and moral support to the new American effort. Beyond military strategy, Churchill's private notes reveal his grasp of the psychological dimensions of leadership. He wrote of the weight on Roosevelt's shoulders, the necessity of conveying confidence without concealing the enormity of the threat, and the subtle art of motivating a nation in shock. He suggested ways to frame public addresses, to emphasize resilience and determination, and to highlight the shared destiny of the Anglo-American alliance. Every phrase, every recommendation, illustrates Churchill's dual role: statesman and wartime psychologist, attuned not just to armies and fleets, but to hearts and minds. Churchill's correspondence also foreshadowed the broader strategic horizon. He discussed the eventual confrontation with Nazi Germany, the importance of securing North Africa, and the long-term implications of a prolonged conflict across Europe and Asia. He urged Roosevelt to consider not only immediate military responses, but the post-war world that would emerge from victory or defeat. His words reveal leader thinking far beyond the headlines, preparing both nations for the trials, sacrifices, and moral complexities a global war would demand. Historians examining these private communications often note the remarkable intimacy of thoughts shared between Churchill and Roosevelt. Here were two men, separated by oceans, yet united in purpose, exchanging ideas, doubts, and strategies with a candor absent from official channels. Churchill's writings underscore the trust he placed in Roosevelt and the confidence he sought to instill, recognizing that the effectiveness of Allied operations would hinge not solely on weapons and manpower, but on the unity and clarity of their command. By the end of December, the contours of a new global alliance had begun to solidify. Churchill's private council provided the scaffolding for the monumental military and diplomatic coordination that would define the war. It was in these hidden pages, often overlooked by the public, that the intellectual and strategic foundations of Allied victory were being laid. And as he penned his final notes to Roosevelt, Churchill understood that the fate of nations now rested not only on armies and fleets, but on the clarity, vision, and moral courage of their leaders. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill's mind was a storm of calculations, fears, and plans. Beyond letters and memoranda to Roosevelt, he maintained a private diary, a record of unfiltered thoughts, anxieties, and strategic imperatives. This was not meant for public eyes. It was a window into the psyche of a leader, confronting the sudden transformation of a global order, and the terrifying speed at which the world had moved from uneasy tension to total war. Churchill's diary entries in December 1941 are marked by an acute sense of urgency. He scribbled with a pen that trembled with both resolve and worry, capturing the immediate consequences of Japan's attack and the cascading challenges for the Allies. The diary shows a man meticulously charting the next moves of not just the Axis powers, but of every Allied nation whose cooperation was now crucial. Each line reveals his recognition that the war's scope was now truly global. Europe, Asia, and the Pacific theaters intertwined in a lethal dance of strategy and survival. In these private reflections, Churchill dissected military developments with precision. He analyzed the vulnerability of British holdings in the Far East, the fragility of supply lines, and the pressing need for coordination with American forces, now officially at war. He recorded intelligence reports, sometimes even questioning their reliability, and juxtaposed them with his own assessments. His diary became a tactical map in words, a personal briefing that allowed him to anticipate threats, identify opportunities, and prepare responses even before official channels had fully mobilized. Yet the diary also reveals Churchill's human side, his recognition of the monumental burden resting on leaders' shoulders. He wrote candidly about sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and the moral weight of decisions that could cost millions of lives. He understood the gravity of inspiring confidence without masking reality, the delicate balance between motivating the public and guiding military leaders. Every entry is a testament to the duality of wartime leadership, a careful blend of intellect and instinct, strategy and empathy, foresight and emotional resilience. Churchill also used the diary as a tool for reflection on international politics. He considered the fragile state of the British Empire, the importance of colonial cooperation, and the nuances of American political will. He pondered how to influence public opinion across continents, the subtleties of propaganda, and the mechanisms by which morale could be preserved even in the face of staggering losses. These writings reveal not just a wartime planner, but a student of power, psychology, and history, someone who understood that victory required more than military might. The diary captures moments of prophetic insight. Churchill predicted that the Pacific conflict would demand a reevaluation of resources, that American industrial capacity would become the linchpin of Allied success, and that Nazi Germany would soon face its own reckoning if the Allies maintained cohesion. He charted scenarios, contingencies, and potential crises with painstaking care, using the diary as both compass and confidant in a world suddenly gone mad. Historians reviewing these pages note their unparalleled value. Unlike speeches or official reports, the diary exposes the unvarnished thought processes of one of history's most consequential leaders. It documents the birth of strategic alliances, the navigation of uncertainty, and the profound weight of responsibility. In its margins, one finds the heartbeat of a man determined not only to survive the storm of war but to steer the world toward an eventual dawn. By preserving this intimate record, Churchill ensured that even private doubts, strategic debates, and urgent warnings would later illuminate the inner workings of leadership during history's darkest hours. The Diary of Urgency is thus both a testament to foresight and a mirror to the courage. It takes the lead when the world itself seems to teeter on the brink. In the chaotic weeks following Pearl Harbor, Churchill realized that public speeches and cabinet meetings alone could not carry the weight of decisions now required. Behind the closed doors of Downing Street, a more secretive, intensive body began to take shape, what Churchill later described in fragments of his private notes as the Secret War Council. This was not merely a committee. It was the crucible in which the fate of nations would be debated, refined, and ultimately decided. The council comprised a select cadre of military advisors, intelligence officers, and political confidants, each chosen for their expertise, discretion, and unwavering loyalty. Churchill's diary reveals his meticulous care in assembling this inner circle. He sought individuals who could think beyond conventional boundaries, who could envision both the immediate tactical necessities and the far-reaching geopolitical consequences. It was a council designed for speed, secrecy, and strategic clarity, a place where conventional bureaucracy could be bypassed in favor of swift. This is CV action. In the council's chambers, located in a nondescript suite within Whitehall, discussions ranged from the deployment of British naval forces in the Pacific to the coordination of intelligence sharing with the United States. Every meeting began with a briefing on the latest intelligence, often including decrypted messages and intercepted communications that revealed Japanese and German intentions. Churchill insisted on personally reviewing each document, demonstrating his belief that leaders must not delegate the understanding of raw information entirely to others. Minutes of these secret gatherings were sparse by design, replaced instead with Churchill's detailed private notes. Here, he recorded not only the decisions made but the reasoning behind them, the doubts considered, and the contingencies planned. These notes reveal a mind constantly balancing the demands of military expediency with political necessity. Churchill weighed the risks of aggressive naval maneuvers against the potential for overextending British forces. He debated how much information could be shared with American counterparts without compromising British strategy. The Council also became a forum for innovation and unconventional thinking. Churchill encouraged discussions on new technologies, from radar deployment to aircraft carrier tactics, as well as the logistics of sustaining a global war effort across multiple continents. Ideas that seemed audacious or even reckless on the surface were often pursued in simulation or in limited trials, reflecting Churchill's understanding that in total war, creativity could be as vital as firepower. Yet the Council was not immune to tension. Debates could be heated, and Churchill often had to assert his authority while simultaneously listening carefully to dissenting voices. The diary entries from this period capture moments of friction, officers arguing over strategy, diplomats warning against provocation, and Churchill himself pacing, scribbling notes, and reconciling conflicting perspectives. These moments, preserved in secrecy, demonstrate the human complexity behind monumental decisions that would later shape history. Historians examining Churchill as private notes from the Secret War Council highlight their unparalleled insight into decision-making under pressure. They reveal the careful calibration of strategy, the moral considerations, and the relentless attention to detail that defined Churchill's leadership. In essence, the Council was both a think tank and a war room, a place where the impossible was weighed, tested, and sometimes achieved. The legacy of the Secret War Council is not only in the victories it helped orchestrate, but in the method it embodied. A disciplined, informed, and visionary approach to leadership when the world hung in the balance. Through these private deliberations, Churchill ensured that every choice, every deployment, every alliance, every bold gamble was grounded in a clarity of purpose and an unyielding commitment to the survival of Britain and the ultimate defeat of tyranny. In the shadowed corridors of wartime diplomacy, Churchill's correspondence with President Franklin D. Roosevelt became a silent weapon, wielded with precision, nuance, and strategy, while the public saw the occasional communique or joint statement. Behind closed doors, Churchill's letters carried messages layered with urgency, subtle persuasion, and coded intention. These were not mere diplomatic formalities. They were instruments of influence designed to shape the course of the war before a single ship sailed or a plane took flight. Churchill began writing immediately after Pearl Harbor, his pen tracing lines that blended the personal and the political. Diaries and later recovered drafts reveal a leader acutely aware of the delicate balance between urgency and tact. He praised Roosevelt's foresight, appealed to shared Anglo-American values, and cautiously underscored the threat posed by the Axis powers. Yet beneath these words, Churchill embedded subtle strategic cues, hints about British needs, priorities, and constraints that he could not afford to state openly in public or in cabinet meetings. The letters served multiple purposes. They reassured Roosevelt of Britain's resilience, outlined operational considerations, and provided candid assessments of Axis movements. But Churchill also used them to test the waters on sensitive matters. The timing of U.S. engagement in Europe, the supply of military aid, and the coordination of joint operations in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. Every word was measured, every paragraph calculated. As historian Max Hastings notes, TC letters were less about what was said, and more about what could be inferred, decoded by a mind trained to read between the lines. One particular letter, written in late December 1941, exemplifies this duality. On its surface, Churchill extolled American courage and the necessity of unity in the face of aggression. Yet hidden within were references to shipping priorities, hints at the critical importance of Arctic convoys, and subtle guidance on the timing of U.S. naval deployments. Roosevelt, with his own circle of advisors, would interpret these cues, understanding that Churchill's language often contained more than it revealed. It was a high-stakes intellectual game, where diplomacy became strategy and letters became tactical instruments. The correspondence also reveals Churchill's personal side. He shared reflections on the immense pressure he felt, the fatigue of constant decision-making, and his deep concern for the morale of his nation. These letters humanized the wartime leader, showing him not only as a strategist but as a man burdened by responsibility, aware that every misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Historians examining these letters note how Churchill balanced personal candor with strategic purpose, ensuring that his authenticity reinforced rather than undermined his influence. Moreover, these letters became an indirect tool of intelligence. Messages could signal priorities to Allied commanders, hint at British capabilities, or even mislead enemy interceptors who were known to scrutinize communications. Churchill's mastery of language, timing, and implication transformed simple ink on paper into a weapon of statecraft. Ultimately, the hidden messages in Churchill's correspondence with Roosevelt reveal a leader who understood that diplomacy and warfare were inseparable. Every letter, every nuance, every carefully placed phrase contributed to a larger strategy: securing American engagement, maintaining British resilience, and orchestrating a coordinated response against the Axis powers. In these private exchanges, history itself was quietly shaped, one word at a time, in the war rooms and studies far from the battlefield, yet influencing every decision that would define the global conflict. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill's personal diary became an unguarded window into the inner conflicts of a wartime leader burdened with impossible decisions. Unlike public speeches or formal correspondence, the diary was a private refuge where the Prime Minister wrestled with the moral, strategic, and psychological weight of global war. These entries reveal a man who was supremely confident in Britain's resilience, yet acutely aware of the fragility of alliances, the unpredictability of enemy action, and the immense stakes of every decision he made. Churchill's diary entries from December 1941 to early 1942 reveal recurring themes: uncertainty, strategic calculation, and self-reproach. The Prime Minister frequently questioned whether Britain could endure a prolonged conflict, whether the United States would commit decisively, and whether the Soviet Union could withstand Hitler's relentless assault. He meticulously recorded military developments, intelligence reports, and assessments from his generals, often annotating them with sharp observations or self-directed critiques. Each entry reads as both a record of events and a rehearsal of potential outcomes. The diary was particularly candid in expressing Churchill's doubts about Allied coordination. Though publicly he projected unwavering confidence, privately he worried about delays in aid, miscommunications with Roosevelt, and the possibility that vital campaigns could fail due to lack of resources or misaligned priorities. One striking entry details his anxiety over the coordination of Lend-Lease, shipments, and the timing of American troops' deployment. He noted the paradox of reliance. Britain depended on U.S. support, yet too early a commitment might strain American resources or provoke domestic political backlash. These tensions shaped not only his private reflections but also his broader strategic maneuvers. Churchill's diary also exposes the human cost of command. Amid the charts, memos, and operational notes, he frequently pauses to reflect on the toll of war on ordinary people. He writes of cities bombed, civilians displaced, and soldiers sacrificed, often in language that alternates between stoic resolve and personal anguish. It is in these moments that the diary transcends the record of strategy, revealing a man profoundly conscious of history's judgment and the ethical weight of leadership. Perhaps most revealing are the entries concerning Hitler himself. Churchill analyzed the Führer not just as a military adversary but as a psychological study. He speculated on Hitler's motivations, predicted potential miscalculations, and considered how the Nazi leader's arrogance could be exploited. These reflections were interspersed with self-directed warnings, a reminder that overconfidence or misreading enemy intentions could be catastrophic. The diary, therefore, functioned as both confession and counsel, guiding Churchill's reasoning in the absence of immediate external feedback. Finally, the diary illuminates Churchill's balancing act between realism and optimism. Each entry records a struggle to reconcile dire circumstances with the necessity of inspiring confidence among his ministers, military leaders, and the British public. While doubt permeates the pages, it is never rather, it sharpens his strategic thinking and reinforces the urgency of decisive action. In this delicate interplay of reflection and foresight, history sees the making of a wartime strategist whose private uncertainties were transformed into public courage. The Diary of Strategic Doubts demonstrates that even the most iconic leaders wrestle with fear, uncertainty, and ethical dilemmas. Churchill's reflections remind us that the machinery of war is powered not only by armies and tanks, but by the private, relentless calculations of those who bear the weight of decision. Each word in the diary is a testament to the human side of history's most consequential battles, moments of doubt that ultimately forged the path to eventual victory. In the tense weeks following Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill's war room was awash with a torrent of intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and cryptic dispatches. Among these, one set stood out: messages that carried warnings cloaked in secrecy, sometimes vague, sometimes alarming. These were the coded warnings, often intercepted from Japanese and German channels, or deciphered from the burgeoning networks of Allied intelligence. They were not merely information, they were subtle alerts that could tilt the balance of life and death decisions across continents. Churchill had long recognized that the war was as much a battle of information as it was of armies. His fascination with intelligence operations dated back to World War I, but by 1941, he understood that cryptography, code breaking, and covert signals were decisive weapons. Daily briefings from Bletchley Park, reports from MI6, and communications from American intelligence officers flowed into Downing Street, often layered with ambiguity. The challenge for Churchill was twofold: interpret these messages accurately and decide when to act publicly or covertly. One of the most pressing concerns in these coded warnings was the looming threat of Axis expansion in the Pacific. Japanese movements, intercepted and decoded, indicated a rapid acceleration in their military operations, though the exact targets remained uncertain. Churchill's diary entries from this period reveal his frustration with the partial nature of intelligence. He was aware of the necessity of acting on incomplete information, yet cognizant that a single misstep could cost millions of lives. These warnings were both strategic and psychological, forcing him to anticipate enemy action while maintaining the delicate morale of the British public. The coded messages from Europe were equally critical. German communications hinted at troop movements and strategic intentions, yet often left key details obscured. Churchill, well-versed in reading between the lines, recognized patterns that others might dismiss. He noted in his diary the subtle indicators of shifting priorities within the Nazi command, the potential for overextension, and even the risk of internal dissent that could be exploited. Each intercepted message was dissected meticulously, annotated with predictions, and integrated into broader operational planning. Churchill's response to these coded warnings was a mixture of urgency, caution, and audacity. He frequently convened secret meetings with top generals, intelligence officers, and diplomatic envoys to cross-check interpretations and evaluate contingency plans. The Prime Minister's approach was methodical. No message was trivial, no hint ignored. Yet he also understood the importance of timing. Some warnings demanded immediate action, such as fortifying positions or diverting resources. Others required patience, observation, and strategic restraint. The stakes were immense, and any error could reverberate across theaters of war. These coded warnings were not only about information, they were about trust. Churchill had to decide which advisors' analyses were reliable, which reports were accurate, and which might be misinformation planted to deceive. His diary often reveals a running internal dialogue, weighing risks, questioning assumptions, and predicting enemy behavior. The tension between uncertainty and decisive leadership is palpable. Every intercepted signal carried the potential to either avert catastrophe or precipitate it. Ultimately, the coded warnings shaped both policy and perception. They influenced military deployments, diplomatic initiatives, and public messaging. Churchill's genius lay in transforming these fragmented, cryptic alerts into coherent strategies, navigating the fog of war with precision. In these clandestine exchanges, one sees the unseen scaffolding of history, the hidden currents of intelligence that guide battles, shape alliances, and determine outcomes far beyond the battlefield. The story of coded warnings underscores the silent, cerebral dimensions of leadership in wartime. Churchill's mastery of these secret signals illustrates the profound interplay between knowledge and action, foresight and intuition. In decoding the messages that others overlooked, he carved a path through uncertainty, turning whispers of intelligence into decisive instruments of victory. Amid the whirlwind of conferences, intelligence briefings, and strategy meetings, Winston Churchill found solace, and perhaps a rare clarity, in the act of writing. Not official communiques, not public addresses to Parliament or radio broadcasts to a restless nation, but personal letters, letters penned in secrecy, never meant to be seen by the public eye, revealing a private side of a man shouldering the weight of a world at war. These letters, often addressed to close friends, family, and confidants, contain thoughts, fears, and reflections that no diary could fully capture and no official document would ever reveal. Churchill's personal letters from the weeks following Pearl Harbor are particularly revealing. They reflect a leader confronting a seismic shift in global dynamics, the sudden entry of the United States into the war, the expansion of Japanese aggression in the Pacific, and the ever-present threat of Nazi domination in Europe. Yet, unlike his public speeches brimming with defiance and courage, these letters reveal a nuanced, introspective mind wrestling with doubt, responsibility, and the moral calculus of wartime decisions. In one such letter to a close aide, Churchill confided his apprehension about the fragility of the British Empire. It described in painstaking detail the precariousness of supply lines, the vulnerability of colonies, and the immense pressure of rallying a population exhausted by years of conflict. He wrote of sleepless nights spent weighing the consequences of each military maneuver, knowing that a single miscalculation could result in catastrophe. The tone is both intimate and haunting, a man laying bare the human cost of leadership under the shadow of global annihilation. Yet these letters were not merely expressions of fear. They also reveal Churchill's strategic mind in full motion. Within the personal, one can trace the professional, the meticulous breakdown of enemy capabilities, the assessment of Allied strength, and the speculative planning for contingencies that might never come to pass. In writing to those he trusted implicitly, Churchill was able to articulate ideas he could not yet commit to publicly, testing hypotheses in private before translating them into policy or action. The letters also serve as windows into Churchill's emotional world. References to family, friends, and lost comrades recur, reminding us that beneath the veneer of indomitable leadership lay a deeply human figure. There is grief for those who had fallen, anxiety for those still in peril, and, remarkably, moments of dark humor, a coping mechanism for a man confronting the unimaginable scale of global conflict. These personal writings reveal the psychological toll of command, the burden of knowledge, and the relentless tension between private sentiment and public duty. Interestingly, some letters contain veiled warnings and coded reflections. While not intelligence in the strictest sense, they offer insight into Churchill's perception of the war's trajectory and his anticipations of enemy actions. He would describe threats metaphorically, hinting at strategies, vulnerabilities, and potential alliances. In this way, the letters serve as both personal confession and strategic exploration, a duality rarely found in the writings of world leaders. The secrecy surrounding these letters was deliberate. Churchill knew that any leak could undermine public morale or provide fodder to enemy propagandists. They were the private scaffolding of leadership, the unseen architecture supporting the decisions made in war rooms and council meetings. To historians, they are invaluable, revealing the interplay between intellect and emotion, strategy and sentiment, courage and vulnerability. Ultimately, these personal letters remind us that history is not only shaped by public acts, but also by private reflections. In them, Churchill's humanity emerges, his doubts, his fears, his hopes, and alongside it, his genius. They provide an intimate portrait of a leader navigating unprecedented peril, a man whose resolve was strengthened not just by duty, but by introspection, contemplation, and the courage to face both the world and himself. In the quiet hours of December 1941, as the world reeled from the twin shocks of Pearl Harbor and Nazi expansion across Europe, Winston Churchill began to envision a future far beyond immediate survival. The personal letters, the clandestine memos, and the endless consultations with generals and diplomats were all converging toward a single, audacious idea: the formation of a global alliance that would unite nations against a common, unparalleled threat. This blueprint was neither spontaneous nor purely idealistic. It was the product of a mind steeped in history, politics, and the raw calculus of war. Churchill's vision extended far beyond Europe or even the Pacific. He recognized that Britain, though resilient, could not sustain a protracted war alone. The empire, though vast, was overstretched, its resources finite. Only a coalition of the world's major powers, militarily, economically, and politically, could hope to challenge the Axis juggernaut. In his writings of the time, Churchill meticulously outlined the potential contributions and limitations of each prospective partner: the industrial might of the United States, the unwavering resilience of the Soviet Union, and the strategic capacities of dominions like Canada, Australia, and India. What makes this blueprint remarkable is the combination of pragmatism and foresight. Churchill's documents reveal a leader who understood not only the immediate need for military coordination, but also the long-term necessity of diplomatic cohesion. He anticipated post-war power dynamics even as bombs were falling and battles raged, recognizing that today's alliances would shape tomorrow's world order. Every paragraph, every notation, reflects an acute awareness that the war was as much political as it was martial. Churchill's private writings from this period also illuminate the tensions inherent in forging such an alliance. There were ideological divides to bridge, historical grievances to navigate, and egos to temper. He was acutely aware of the suspicion that the Soviets might harbor toward the Western powers, and equally mindful of American hesitations and isolationist tendencies. Yet, in his letters, he projected confidence, using logic, history, and personal persuasion to outline how trust could be built, commitments secured, and objectives aligned. It was statecraft in its most delicate, intricate form. The blueprint emphasized shared responsibility and strategic coordination. Churchill wrote in depth about combined military planning, the pooling of intelligence, and synchronized operations across multiple theaters of war. He also addressed economic collaboration, stressing the importance of supply chains, resource allocation, and industrial mobilization. In essence, Churchill was drafting the operational and philosophical foundation of what would later become the Allied Command, a framework that could withstand setbacks, absorb shocks, and deliver decisive victories. Equally compelling are the personal reflections interwoven in these writings. Churchill recognized that alliances are forged not just through treaties, but through mutual respect, understanding, and shared stakes. He frequently noted the human element, the need to inspire confidence among leaders, to navigate temperaments and national priorities, and to create a sense of shared destiny. These notes, written with both precision and passion, reveal a statesman who understood that victory depended as much on diplomacy as it did on guns, tanks, and bombs. The formation of this blueprint was a turning point. While the world would later recognize the strength of the Allied coalition, these letters revealed that its conception was neither accidental nor inevitable. Churchill, in his private correspondence, demonstrates that the architecture of victory was being meticulously constructed long before the first joint operations took place. He foresaw the necessity of unity, the power of coordinated effort, and the moral imperative of standing together against tyranny. Ultimately, the blueprint for a global alliance stands as a testament to Churchill's genius. It is evidence of a leader who, amid chaos, could not only react, but anticipate, who could not only fight, but plan, who could not only lead a nation, but envision a world united against oppression. In the shadows of war, behind closed doors and private letters, Churchill was laying the foundation for victory, a vision that would define the outcome of World War II and shape the post-war world for generations to come.